Am I the only one who thinks this story is just a little weird? We come to this Sunday every single year, and it's a pivotal point in Jesus' life. It's the bridge between the Galilean ministry and the journey into Jerusalem. It's the bridge between the season of Epiphany into Lent. But it is so much more than that. Yet it never seems to stand out in the way many of the other Jesus stories do, don't you think? Who here this morning woke up and thought, yay, it's Transfiguration Sunday? What do we do with dazzling white clothes, a face shining like the sun, and ominous clouds that start speaking in ways that make people fall to the ground in fear? What do we do with a lot of the art that depicts the shiny, floating Jesuses? And I'll admit, I'm a bit of a skeptic. But as Reverend Morgan pointed out last week in her sermon about what it means to be holy, she said, it doesn't need to make sense in order for it to be true. And it doesn't need to make sense to me as I preach it now. What's explicit, however, in the Transfiguration is the foretelling of Jesus' death and resurrection and return. It keeps encouraging the way of the cross because before this, Jesus told the disciples, if anyone wants to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For those who want to save their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it. Talk about a transfiguration. Jesus is declaring here that if we are to carry a cross, then we are too being called to find ourselves in risky, complex places when we challenge imperial control. Jesus is not intimidated into compliance and accommodation. If we save our own lives, we stay in the safety of not confronting the injustices of the present. But if we lose our life for Jesus' sake, we fully embrace God's empire. All of this is a precursor to the Transfiguration story. And it is no mistake how perfectly placed the text immediately following the Transfiguration is when Jesus cures a boy with a demon. Because the powers of principalities that grapple for control will not be squashed by the truth of Jesus, will not be overcome by the liberating power of Jesus, will not be ignored by the mercy of Jesus. Sandwiched between these two provocative and oh so relevant stories, the cross and self-denial and the admonished demon, comes this breakthrough of the coexisting cosmic and earthly, the infinite and the temporal, the divine and the human realms that break open in an overwhelming glimpse of beauty and awe. There are all kinds of connections the Transfiguration makes. It's a hearkening back as much as it is a foreshadowing. It's a recollection to Moses on Mount Sinai in Deuteronomy, and Elijah's encounter with God on a mountain from 1 Kings. Matthew pairs the law and the prophets with the bright revelation of Jesus, with a command to listen to him. And listen, by the way, in this text, means to understand. Listen so as to understand. Understanding cannot come to fruition without our willingness to be changed. The Gospel of Matthew has often been referred to as the teacher's gospel, and the writer of Matthew's gospel has also given a little more credit to the disciples so that here they are simply slow to learn instead of more or less just not understanding as they are portrayed in the Gospel of Mark. So there's some room for growth, thanks be to God. Matthew's author also takes material from the Markan source and adds references to the disciples' phrases like worshiping, Lord, Son of God, making Matthew's gospel a distinctive pointer to the identity of Jesus as the Son of God, while also presenting a discipleship ethic that encourages life in the present along with an eternal destination. And I love the inclusivity of this mountaintop experience. Most of these divine encounters on the mountaintop have occurred one-on-one. But here, Jesus brings his friends with him. The biblical message here is increasing its inclusivity. And when we compare Matthew's transfiguration story with today's epistle in 2 Peter, after the recollection of God's word saying, "This is my Son with whom I am well pleased," verse 19 proclaims, "So we have the prophetic message more fully confirmed. You will do well to be attentive to this, as to a lamp shining in a dark place, until the day dawns and the morning star rises in your hearts." Beautiful. Verse 16 in today's epistle emphasizes power and coming. So we have the powerful present and the yet to come. And the glory will not be revealed to a select few, but to the whole world, expanding inclusivity. And then today's text ends with Jesus ordering the disciples, "Tell no one about the vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." Oh, come on, really? After this, tell no one? Jesus leaves us with a both and, the divine interruption, this gift of the overwhelming presence of God, with a reminder that there is much more to learn and more to come, as always. So rich, so complex. Every single one of these aspects of the story is the touch of the Transfiguration. I'd like to hone in on a few particular profundities in this text. First, the experience of awe and the sacredness of both ands. Second, I want to talk about Peter's response. It might be one of my favorite parts in the story. Third, the power of touch. And finally, we'll discuss the transformative response. But I think we need a little permission to sit in the awe of it all. I think it's okay to let this story be weird. Maybe we need a little weird. Maybe we don't have to be in such a hurry to come down the mountain. Maybe the journey of faith feels like we're always on the mountain in some aspect, constantly seeking the presence and touch of Jesus. Maybe all you can really do right now is rest in it all. And Jesus gives us that permission to rest. From Matthew chapter 11, "I will give you rest, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." The points about awe, paradox, and touch delve into the mystical forms of the story. Now, don't let the word mystical scare you. Do not be afraid. Mysticism simply implies communion with God. It is to enter into a more mature aspect of faith reflected by the known historical Christian mystics. The experience that God dwells in us. The life I live now is not my own. Christ is living in me, Galatians 2:20. You are in the Spirit, since the Spirit of God dwells in you, Romans 8:9, St. Paul. To experience the mystical is an invitation to heed the reminder that God speaks to us through, as stated in Romans 8:26, inner groaning that cannot be expressed in speech. Well, what better moment than the Transfiguration to leave us speechless, in a place where we don't quite know what to say or do? The Transfiguration is distinctly Jesus, while it is also a mirror. Jesus is transformed, but reveals what is, what has been, and what will always be. A both and. There is beauty and fear. I recently listened to a repeat interview with the late Irish poet and philosopher John O'Donohue by Krista Tippett on her radio segment On Being. In this particular interview, the discussion topic was beauty. They distinguished between beauty as glamour in the way many of us think about the term, and the kind of beauty that John O'Donohue describes as that in the presence of which we feel more alive. He goes on to talk about beauty in thresholds, a perfect resemblance, I think, to the dazzling beauty and awe witnessed in the Transfiguration. He says, the threshold, in a way, is a place where you move into more critical, challenging, and worthy fullness. There are thresholds, huge ones, in every life, where even just a few seconds of joy or suffering can leave you standing in a different world. Suddenly, everything that seemed so important before is all gone, and now all you are thinking of is this, and there is beauty in that. Beauty isn't just about nice and lovely. Beauty is about more rounded, substantial becoming. Beauty is about an emerging fullness and a kind of homecoming for the enriched memory of your unfolding life. There's another both and, memory and unfolding. Perhaps the memory of the brief but ineffable experience of the Transfiguration continues to be a part of the ever-unfolding sacred story we are a part of, and of which we are called to play a role. And it offers the disciples a paradox where God says that there is nothing they can do to prepare for joy or sorrow, but at the same time we cannot escape the light God shines on our path. Even in a modern worldview where the sensical, maybe even the relevancy of the story might be questioned, the mystical lens gives us permission to see something anew in a fuller reality. We can live and love on earth just as we have awe-filled flashes when the entire world is filled with God's glory. Holy, holy, holy. The whole earth is filled with God's glory, from Isaiah. Not only does the Transfiguration enlighten Jesus, but we become enlightened too, which brings me to Peter. You might have thought I was going to point the finger at Peter, but I think Peter is moving in the right direction, or at least partially. There's a sense of wanting to stay in this mystical occurrence, but mysticism isn't an end, it's rather the insight and incentive for transformation. As John O'Donohue says, beauty is an edge of becoming. So Peter's response in the power of touch. Remember, Peter wanted to build 3 dwellings for Jesus, Moses, and Elijah, and as he was describing his intent, he's interrupted by the voice cloud. In verses 7 and 8, after the overwhelmed disciples fall to the ground, Jesus came and touched them and said, "Get up and do not be afraid." And in being touched, they looked up and saw only Jesus. Moses and Elijah no longer appear. Perhaps Peter's desire to build dwellings was fine for them, but Jesus reveals himself as the dwelling in the flesh. What I love about Peter's role in the story is that he may have been a little lost about what to do, but he was only responding culturally and ritualistically. Regardless, he knew this was an important moment. The glory of God can be a bit terrifying, even as it is beautiful, yes? When the blazing light purifies barriers between loving God and loving one another, when all the control we thought we had is gone, well, that's not comfortable. That's terrifying. But it also reveals the children of God we all are and are all meant to be. Peter may have been right to proclaim the goodness of the present moment, but this doesn't mean that change won't happen. A little more about touch. The sense of touch is intrinsic to humanity. David Linden, neuroscientist and author of Touch, the science of hand, heart, and mind, believes that of the five senses, touch is often overlooked, but likely the most important for promoting psychological health. Touch is a language we desperately need to regain fluency in. I believe that's also an important part for our spiritual health. Now, I think it needs to be said that I am talking about healthy touch in the context of healthy relationships and healthy boundaries. This distinguishing point needs to be clear, especially now where it seems that inappropriate touch and sexual assault, which affects an overwhelming amount of people, is ignored or dismissed. No. the horrific truth that negative touch tells is a very real story for many. Healthy, positive touch, however, is a necessity for human survival. In a DePaul University study, it was discovered that we have the innate ability to decode emotions via touch alone. Linden's research and study shows that touch deprivation in infancy has detrimental neuropsychiatric effects and physical consequences. We lose empathy and bonds of trust if we are deprived of touch. Touch is the social glue throughout all our lives. It's no wonder that Jesus' life and ministry is one of touch. Perhaps Jesus is breaking open a sort of touch-phobic society in the way he touches his disciples. Think about the many gospel stories of when Jesus provides touch, or when others want to touch Jesus. The brave woman who touches Jesus' cloak. Even after Jesus' death, Thomas touched Jesus' wounded side, and he was transformed by it. On the Emmaus journey, when Jesus breaks the bread in that tactile moment of touch, it is then when he is recognized. Jesus is not timid when it comes to touch. His vulnerable courage to touch people and allow others to touch him brought healing and comfort. Jesus' touch heals the sick, and in this story, assuaged fear and encouraged his disciples. In the same manner that we need touch, we also need the Transfiguration, as weird as it is. A simple touch can create a massive transformation. Often when I encounter patients in the hospital, a gentle presence transforms chaos into calm, or a simple touch of the hand moves frustration and anger into sacred tears and cathartic release. Suddenly, the ambiance of cold noise and chatter is transfigured into a sanctuary of grace, peace, and hope, or a safe place to feel whatever emotions are raw and real in that moment. I notice this as a mother and a partner with my children and my spouse. In our family, we try to nurture the courage to actually say, I need contact. That's not easy. But the nurturing of healthy connections requires vulnerable contact. And Jesus is fully exposed in the Transfiguration. To be vulnerably exposed is to be authentic. To receive the powerful touch of the Transfiguration means that we too will be changed by it. Perhaps Peter was hesitant to embrace this realization. Perhaps we are too. South African social rights activist Desmond Tutu gives us an insight into the power of transformation the Transfiguration touch provides. He says God places us in the world as his fellow workers, agents of transfiguration. We work with God so that injustice is transfigured into justice, so that there will be more compassion and caring, that there will be more laughter and joy, that there will be more togetherness in God's world. How will we be agents of transfiguration? My daughter Taylor, earlier this week, on what was supposed to be a day off, went to her high school during the Teacher in-Service Day with her peers on the Gay Straight Alliance Club to participate in a panel discussion. Especially critical now, when just this week, in a time where basic human rights and dignity have been blatantly dismissed, these students shared with teachers opportunities to listen, to understand, and to better support LGBTQ students. In a world of homophobia and transphobia, agents of transfiguration. Just this past weekend, a Jewish cemetery in St. Louis was desecrated, where more than 150 headstones were knocked over or damaged. 2 American Muslim activists started a fundraiser to help pay for the repairs. The funds have currently topped over $100,000. In a world of anti-Semitism and acts of destruction, agents of transfiguration. In a Kansas City bar this week, 2 Indian nationals, Alak Madasani and Srinivas Kuchabatla, were told to get out of my country by a white man who proceeded to shoot them, killing one and also wounding a 3rd man, Ian Grillot, who tried to intervene. I was just doing what anyone should do for another human being, he humbly said. In a world of hate, xenophobia, and violence, agent of transfiguration. Many of you this afternoon from our predominantly white congregation will be participating in a luncheon discussion with our friends at New Hope Baptist Church, a predominantly black congregation, building relationships, engaging in fellowship, listening, understanding, and playing a role in racial reconciliation in Denver. Agents of transfiguration. In a lovely visit to a school in Brooklyn, New York early this month, the author of one of my son Nathan's favorite books, Wonder, R.J. Palacio, talked with students about kindness. Every single answer these little ones gave was just perfection. One young boy said, "If someone's new somewhere, maybe you could make them feel welcome. Can I play with you?" Another young girl said, "I think kindness," she said in her sweet and tiny voice, "should spread everywhere, like to everyone in different states, and no matter what color they are. You should be kind to everyone equally." That's how she pronounced equally. Another student wisely said, "It's better to be kind than to be right." In a world of ostracizing, bullying, and a desire to be right, agents of transfiguration, bringing joy and togetherness. There are so many more examples. Which ones come to your mind? Reverend Dr. Alexander James Forbes wrote a powerful summary about the Transfiguration when he wrote, "In the current climate of discouragement, dismay, depression, and demoralization, we need a massive infusion of encouragement. People of faith would do well to be alert to the ways God is calling us to have a healing influence and to be a bold witness for truth, justice, compassion, and peace. So we will prove to have a saving influence in our nation. Let us pray that we may be empowered for the urgently needed ministry, the vocation of encouragement." With so many possibilities, the story of the Transfiguration perhaps leaves us in a place of ambiguity. Maybe this goes back to just letting the story be weird. This is a pivotal moment in the life of Jesus, which means it is always a pivotal moment in our lives. The power of the Transfiguration touch is what we need. We need encouragement. We need healthy touch. We need to be transformed while the one who was fully revealed walks beside us, reminding us to not be afraid. We need the weird and wonderful Transfiguration touch. Amen.